Dmytro Kuleba, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, believes that Ukraine may receive its first F-16 fighter jet by the end of March 2024. But the deadline may be shifted. In an interview with Radio Liberty, a journalist asked to give an estimate of when training would begin and when Ukraine could expect to receive the US-made F-16 fighter jets. Kuleba said that it is a very complicated technical issue. Training should begin in August, possibly in early September. In parallel, we will be preparing the legal decisions necessary for the transfer of the aircraft and the aircraft themselves. Kuleba thinks if by the end of the first quarter of the next year, the first F-16s are flying in Ukrainian air, piloted by Ukrainian pilots, then it will be one schedule. But Ukraine also needs to train engineers, like technicians, and prepare the infrastructure. There are a lot of peculiarities, so the schedule could be shifted. He has added that the United States is making decisions on providing Kyiv with some other types of weapons, and these are also very difficult decisions, but, I quote, "a meaning US are making them nevertheless." My question is, does all this Western weaponry really pose a threat to Russia, to Russia's sovereignty, you think, when in Ukrainian hands?
Of course not. I mean, this is all nonsense. We have heard from the National Security Council here a lot of nonsensical arguments. The first is we must not provoke Mr. Putin. And bizarre ideas that we must not cross his red lines because then he will use nukes. And this is self-imposed by the White House, which makes no sense. And the worries, particularly by National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, we must not provoke a third world war. I mean, take a break. This is not a risk. And what we saw at this NATO summit was that only the US and Germany thought like that. So the National Security Council here really needs to grow up.
Well, National Security Councils, I mean, UN Security Council was recently presided by a country terrorist, led by an international thug at large. This is some structures in Europe really should be changed according to the reality. Because, as for me, it very much looks like Russia is still presiding over the UN Security Council, and NATO decisions are made with a certain touch of fearing Russia. Or you think that this is just an ignorance of, young politicians, or there is fear?
I think that is ignorance. They don't understand that Russia cannot use nuclear arms. And it's very striking that Ukrainians, Poles, Balts are not afraid of Russia using nuclear arms because everybody understands if Putin would use nukes, he would be dead. And that's not a comfortable situation to be in.
You mean to be dead? Yeah, certainly not. Ukraine can also expect more stringent controls to be put in place by US authorities to protect its weapons technology. This is spelled out in the State Department document. US plan to counter illicit diversion of certain advanced conventional weapons in Eastern Europe, which was published in October. The plan addresses the need to protect the weapons themselves and the technology contained in them. It outlines the need to securely store and account for weapons in Ukraine in neighboring countries, to introduce strong regional border management and security to observe and stop illicit transfers, help build capacity in Ukraine's security forces, law enforcement and border control agencies to deter, detect and interdict illicit arms trafficking. Ukraine must adopt all elements of the US plan. It has aspirations to join the EU and NATO finally, and has been given strong indications that this ambition will be supported in due course achieved. So the US plan to counter illicit diversion of certain advanced conventional weapons in Eastern Europe was announced in October. Does it work at all?
Well, first of all, I think that all this is complete nonsense. And this nonsense comes from two different sources. One is the recent, or three different sources. One is the recent US experience of war has been in Iraq and Afghanistan. And there's no reason to draw any parallels with them, but that's what a lot of the people in the Washington establishment who don't know anything about abroad is doing. So they think Ukraine is just another Afghanistan or Iraq. The second point is the Trump people who are in favor of Putin and Russia and against Ukraine and democracy. And they try simply to invent as many problems as possible. And the third problem is the non-governmental organizations, anti-corruption organizations that are also drawing from the Afghan and Iraqi experiences. And they want to have a special inspector general. So this is basically US domestic politics. It has nothing to do with Ukraine.
Does Ukraine stand a chance against that? How can the authorities and Ukrainian people maybe to fight this ignorance and to fight this Trump people, to fight Russian propaganda that intervenes into domestic affairs of United States and Europe? What is your advice?
Well, it's actually quite easy. You do these formal things as long as they don't become too bureaucratic, and you make sure that no scandals happen. So as long as no scandals happen, these things will not be too arduous.